What's going on, everybody? This is Benjamin Bakchor bringing you another video. Today in F1 2020, going to be doing some no racing line races, continuing our Road to 110 series. Going to be racing at Paul Ricard today. I don't really have a problem with this track at 110 with the racing line on, so instead of doing a video with the racing line, we're just going to skip that altogether for France and just go to a race without the racing line. I think the second or third video ever on this channel was a race at Paul Ricard with the difficulty at 100. So today we're going to be trying it at 105. I have gotten a lot of practice in since then, so this track is a lot easier for me. I think I might be able to handle it at 110 without the racing line, but I figure 105 is a good starting point. I didn't do qualifying today, so just jumping right into the race. We're going to be starting P4 behind Hamilton and Verstappen, which is good because they're usually the guides that I use to determine how well I'm doing on a track. So just going to be using a typical time trial setup, except we're raising the rear wing by 1 just to get a little bit more stability on the back end. Not going quite as fast as you would normally be going in qualifying or time trials, so you need that extra rear wing to help you through the traction zones here. So start of the race, we get a pretty decent start. Going to get past Hamilton right away, but his proximity arrows are still red. Going to try and squeeze him out a little bit through these first couple of corners here and get in front of him. And we are successful, so now our next goal is really to get in front of Leclerc, just because you're going to be losing so much time behind that Ferrari. I always struggle to get traction out of this right-hand turn here. Or the second part of this right-hand turn here anyway. Seems like I can never get on the throttle quite as fast as the AI can. But that one wasn't too bad. Throwing it up into Rich and overtake just to get in front of Leclerc there. Try to minimize as much time loss as possible to Verstappen. And if you can't get him on this first straight, for some reason the AI doesn't like to use ERS to defend on the second part of the straight after the chicane. So it's really easy to overtake them on this part of the track here. And now really just looking to maintain the DRS gap with Verstappen. There's a lot of long sweeping turns, double apex turns at France, so really what you have to watch is your downshifts. You kind of have to walk them down pretty slowly just to maintain that high minimum speed through the corners. You don't want to blast down through the gears like you would at a hairpin or anything like that. Too much engine braking will slow you down too much and you'll lose too much time. This final right-hand turn, the game suggests for you to be in 4th gear and drop down to 2nd, but I find that dropping down to 3rd in the left-hander before it, and then when you hit that final right-hand turn, downshifting to 1st gear really helps with the rotation there. Saved a lot of time on my laps once I figured that out. And it's made that last corner a little bit more consistent for me. Before, when I used to try and take it in 4th and then drop down the 2nd, I would always go wide for some reason. I think just because I was going too fast or the car wasn't being rotated enough. So dropping down the 1st gear on that last corner really helps out. So now still maintaining that DRS gap to Verstappen. Doesn't look like it'll be too difficult even at 105. I think I've gotten enough practice in on this track that we should be able to overtake and keep the lead for the rest of the race. What you can do is on the left-hander of the chicane that breaks up this back straight here, you can really cut that corner. For some reason the game's really lenient there. I try not to do it too often just because France is a track that's really easy to get track extension warnings on, and you know, you don't want too many time penalties for that, for trying to cut that corner too often. Trying to save a 1/10 to 2 isn't really worth a 3-second penalty. Now we're coming to the start of lap number 3. DRS is enabled, and it looks like it was pretty easy to keep up with Verstappen here, so taking him on the next DRS straight shouldn't be too much of a problem. We also currently have the fastest lap here. For some reason, I don't know why, but Hamilton's AI isn't really super strong at this track. Whenever I do races at Paul Ricard, I feel like I find myself battling Verstappen for the victory more often than I do with Hamilton, which is odd because there's so many straights at Paul Ricard. You would think the Mercedes would have an advantage here, but at least with me anyway, Verstappen seems to be a much stronger driver than Hamilton at this track. So using DRS to overtake wasn't much of an issue. Going wide there a little bit just so we don't make too much contact with Verstappen. And that's pretty much it for this race. Once we got out in front, the AI really didn't stand a chance to overtake again. We just kept extending the gap, and by the end of the race, I think we were about 7 or 8 seconds in front. Only really losing the lead when we stopped to change out our tires. But for the most part, once we got into P1, we pretty much stayed P1. And that's about it. There wasn't too much going on here, so that's why I kind of squeezed it in with the Italy race. But I figured I'd throw it up there anyway as proof. So 105 difficulty at Paul Ricard, not really an issue for us.
We're approaching the pit window. You'll be on the mediums.
So we do stop for a pit stop, change onto the mediums. Usually takes me a lap or two to really get used to it. I wish the game would allow you to pick your tires, your tire compound in time trial, just so you can kind of practice on different compounds without having to jump into a race or a practice weekend or anything like that. But usually it only takes me about a lap or two to get comfortable on the new compounds, but I would prefer to just be able to select it in time trial mode and practice with it by myself on track. We'll just skip to the final lap here just because there really wasn't much happening throughout the race. Like I said, we did drop back a few positions during the pit stops, but we pretty much got them back as soon as everybody else pitted on the next lap. All in all, not really a difficult race. I have been focusing on France a lot recently, just because, like I said, it's one of my better tracks. So I just kind of wanted to get one track where I was really good at, and then kind of jump onto the next track, and then so on and so on. So France is probably my personal favorite and best, and then I think Italy would probably be my second best. I was going to go in chronological order, but I was having some issues at Bahrain. That downhill left-hand turn 10 gave me so many problems. I kind of just gave up on that and figured I'll just jump onto another track. But here we go, end of the race. We do finish 6.5 seconds in front of P2. Hamilton does end up pipping Verstappen on the last lap. But yeah, not too much difficulty with this race today, and really any day. I think maybe our next race we might just jump up to 110 and see how well we do, just because we beat the AI by about 6-7 seconds today, and they weren't even really battling behind us, so we kind of won on merit. But we're just going to jump to the final standings, show you where everybody ended up. I think we started 4th, finished first, so pretty good race for us. We're just going to jump right into Italy. So jumping right into the Italy race, again at 105 difficulty, no assists or anything like that on. Just another time trial setup, except we changed the wings from 1.6 to 1.7 just for, again, some more rear stability. Using some cheeky moves to get past the slow AI at turn 1. We do run into the back of Ricciardo there, but no wing damage, so we kind of lucked out. And now we find ourselves up at P7 after starting P11. So I did just kind of want to start at the back of the track just to show a little bit more overtaking in the races and have a little bit more action for you guys to watch. I'm not using too much ERS on this first lap here just because the AI really goes into corners really slowly. They kind of bunch up at the beginning of the race. So no point in wasting too much ERS unless somebody is about to overtake you from behind, and Norris is a good half a second behind us, so there's really no threat of that happening right now. So I just figured I'd save my ERS for when the cars kind of get strung out a little bit more and overtaking is a little bit easier.
Keep pushing. Let's capitalize on that first lap.
But I do want to get out in front of Ricardo and possibly Sainz as soon as possible, just because they won't be quite as fast as the other cars at the front of the group here. And you can see Sainz is already falling back a little bit from Ocon in P4. Get a little snap of oversteer coming out of Parabolica. I think the dirty air really kind of screwed with us there. But now using overtake to try and get in front of these guys. And I did kind of send it aggressively, but didn't make any contact with anybody, just locked up the wheels a little bit. But other than that, we made it through pretty cleanly. You do have to watch out for engine overheating, just because there are so many straights, and you'll most likely be sitting right on the gearbox of the guy in front of you. So through these corners, or through any corners really, you should probably be in lean fuel mix just to kind of cool the engine down a little bit. Lesmos is probably the weakest part of the track for me, just because I kind of go into them kind of tentatively to avoid off tracks and spinning out. I do lose a lot of time through that part of the track, but the first and second chicanes I usually take better than the AI, so I gain the time back there. And this final chicane here is usually 50-50, so I kind of break even throughout the track. So as long as the first and second chicanes are good, I can usually make up time on the AI and catch up to guys in front. So now start at lap 3, DRS is enabled. Just gonna throw it into overtake and try to get in front of Ocon here, just because he's a little bit slower than the top 3 in the Renault. He does always qualify pretty high though. Whenever I do qualifying at Monza, the Renaults do really well on this track for one reason or another. But we do get by him pretty cleanly. Perez shouldn't be too much of a problem. They do have a Merc engine, so they have straight line speed, but through the corners they're usually pretty slow. Pretty good chicane there. Gain a little bit of time. Gonna lose it right back through these right hand turns here. Actually, it wasn't too bad that time. So I kind of know what I need to do to get through that section clean. It's just I have to work on consistency and a little bit of confidence in my braking zones. But for starting at P11, where we're doing a pretty good job of sticking with the leaders here at the end of lap 3 here. Pretty sure we're going to get in front of Perez with the help of DRS. You can brake much later than the AI does going into turn 1 here. I'm not really sure why, but they brake really early. I'm sure they brake early for every other corner too. I just notice it more here for some reason. Perez locks up, which should make this pretty easy. Make a clean overtake, and now really just hunting down the 2 guys that are a threat at all in this race. So unlike France, Italy has a lot of hard braking zones going into the corners, so you will kind of have to blast down the gears on this track, as opposed to gently going down the gears to maintain high minimum speed through the corners. And pretty much as long as you're sticking in the DRS gap of the car in front of you, it shouldn't be too difficult to overtake on this track, especially being in a Mercedes. Probably the fastest car in the game overall. Straight line speed and through the corners. And then this next overtake on Verstappen will be a piece of cake, even with our engine overheating. Again, just being careful through Parabolica there, just because the dirty air can send you out wide. But we didn't even need overtake or DRS to get in front of him. So that was pretty easy. And now pretty much focusing on Lewis Hamilton, trying to catch up to him. I feel like that right-hand turn, it's better to take too much curb than not enough curb. I feel like if you hop over the thing with your left wheels barely being on the pavement, it's a little bit smoother than being halfway up the curb. The car just seems to jump around a lot if you're not really on the entire curb there through that first chicane. And now we're in DRS, so this shouldn't be too much of a difficult task to get in front of Hamilton. By this point, I realized our pit stops are going to be coming up soon. I'm pretty low on ERS, so I make the decision right now to really just kind of sit behind him, harness as much ERS as possible, keep my engine cool. I do kind of want to use up a little bit of fuel because we have a lot of fuel left over in the tank. I think we're going to finish with a lot of extra fuel left over. So right now, just really preparing for the overtake that's not going to happen until after the pit stops. But just using DRS to stay close behind, and then trying to minimize our mistakes through the corners so that we maintain that DRS gap, and then just really wait until after pit stops to really try and overtake. So when you're this close, you will definitely get an undercut pitting earlier. And for some reason, the AI, when I'm in the Mercedes, they always pit Hamilton exactly 1 lap after I pit. So I know that they're probably going to call me in at the end of lap 7. I'll get an undercut on Hamilton. He'll make a pit stop then at the end of lap 8. And then as long as I have enough ERS and fuel, I should be able to overtake him if I manage them efficiently, if you understand what I'm saying. It'll be a little bit more difficult if you're further back. You won't get quite as much of an undercut. And then if you make any mistakes at all, that the gap gets a little bit bigger, and then it's a little bit more difficult to kind of get the undercut to work for you. But we're really close to him. We're only a half a second behind him. So just trying to maintain this gap until the pit stops. Usually I don't overtake Hamilton on track. It's just a little bit easier to overtake him in the pit lanes. So right now, really just making sure I have enough ERS so that I can get a really fast out lap after the pit stop to overtake him while he's still in the pit lane. Obviously, the strategy will be a little bit different if you're racing online against other people, just because there's so many more factors that go into strategy, and they're not as predictable as the AI is. But in Grand Prix mode, it's pretty easy to overtake if you're this close to the guy in front of you before the pit stops anyway. So again, preparing for our pit stop now, not using any ERS on our in-lap. And just trying to stick as close to Hamilton as possible. I do need a little bit of work on my pit stops, my pit lane entry. So you'll notice that I go in much slower than I probably have to, and I hit the pit button way before I really need to, but I didn't want to get a 5-second penalty. Do notice that there are cars behind me too. At this point I was worried that I might get held up and my plan wouldn't work, but miraculously we get out in front of the racing point just in time and don't get held up any longer than we have to. Also right now I'm looking at the mini-map at the bottom left hand of the screen, and I notice that there is a Williams coming down the straight right now, and I really don't want to get stuck behind him, so I'm just putting it up into overtake and Rich, but he wasn't really too much of a threat. But that is kind of one thing you should be looking out for coming out of the pit lane, is if there's slower cars that are about to overtake you. I feel like most people really don't worry about that, and then they find themselves stuck behind a much slower car, and then they lose so much time on their outlap. So now really focusing, just trying to not make any huge mistakes. And it looks like we should be close enough right now that we should be able to overtake Hamilton before he comes out of his pit stop. So generally, if you're at this chicane by the time somebody's going into the pit lane, you should be close enough to overtake. So I kind of use that as a measuring stick. If I'm still on the straight before that final chicane and somebody goes into the pit lane, I know that I most likely won't be coming out in front of them. But if I'm hitting that chicane the same time that they're going into the pit stop, usually overtaking them will be pretty easy as they're coming out. And as you can see, we cut it pretty close, but we do get out in front of Hamilton, and that's pretty much it. Once you get in front of the AI, it's really hard for them to get past you if you're comfortable enough at the difficulty that you're racing at. So 105 is I'm pretty comfortable at 105, and as you can see, I was still hanging with Hamilton when he was in P1. He wasn't really pulling away or anything like that. So I know that once I get out in front, it's going to be really difficult for the AI to catch up. And that is pretty much it for this race. Once we get out in front, the AI really doesn't stand a chance. Just skipping ahead to the final lap here, just so you can kind of see the end of the race. But I feel like France and Italy, I'm pretty comfortable at now. I think the next time these tracks show up in a Road to 110 episode, I'll probably be trying them both at 110. I know we didn't really win by any crazy amount of time or anything like that, but about 7 seconds at France, and it looks to be about maybe 4.5-5 seconds here at Italy. The AI really weren't battling either, so we kind of won the races on merit and not just because the AI were holding each other up. So pretty successful races. There are a couple more tracks that I might just skip the racing line portions altogether. But I think for the most part, the rest of the tracks, I'll probably have to be doing a little bit more practice with the racing line on to be able to beat the AI. But France and Italy are, I think I'm comfortable enough now that I don't need the racing line to race against others online. I did do a race yesterday at Britain without the racing line on, and I won that pretty handedly. But I think it's just because the level of competition I was facing wasn't really that high. But that's it pretty much for today's video. We've taken Italy and France off the list for our first attempts at Road to 110. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you've picked up a tip or two that'll help you guys out in your games. If you think I deserve it, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe. Stay tuned for more videos. Remember to eat your bok choy, and I will definitely see you guys in the next video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section. I'll do my best to get back to you guys.
Outside, cutting underneath, we saw it all today, and it's really nice to see a Grand Prix won in that manner. A race surely that will satisfy the purists today, I think.
Mercedes are on top form once again after an excellent race weekend. It's great to see them up on that podium once again.